In 2022 alone, she oversaw the development and adoption of Denver's first mandatory inclusionary zoning requirement and a planning process for an unused, privately owned 155-acre golf course. If voters approve the plan this year, the site will host a mix of housing and retail and over 100 acres of public parks. She previously served as Senior Vice President for Real Estate at Denver International Airport, where she was responsible for implementing a strategic development plan across 16,000 acres of airport land. She was, before that, Assistant Director of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority and a project manager with the Mayor's Office for Redevelopment of Stapleton Airport into the new urbanist Central Park development. She is a member of the Urban Land Institute, Biennial of the Americas, International Women's Forum, and was previously Vice Chair of the Denver Planning Board. Deputy Mayor Aldrete holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder and her master's degrees in urban and regional planning and Latin American studies from the University of California at Los Angeles. Please join me in thanking Deputy Mayor Aldrete for being with us today. And if you want to roam.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hadn't quite heard that bio, so it actually, I sound pretty okay. I think my mom would be proud. But thank you, Rolf, for asking me here today, and Carrie, also here from CU Denver. I am just pleased as punch to be spend a little bit of time with you all today. I do want to give a quick shout out to CU as my alma mater, as well as UCLA. I would not be where I am today but for those schools and that education. So thank you so much to both of those schools and to all of you to working towards bettering our city's futures. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context about Denver and the since we are here, and hopefully you're getting out and getting a little bit of good weather to enjoy the city. But over the past decade, we have grown by 20%. Infrastructures, jobs, housing investments have brought new people to Colorado's capital city. It's been a thriving thriving economy for the past decade, and certainly an opportunity for young, highly educated people with an attractive local culture in arts, music, food, and easy access to the mountains and outdoor recreation. But it's not all good. Rapid urban growth brings new challenges and requires new thinking. As city builders, it's our responsibility to get out in front of those challenges and not respond to them. So I'm just going to mention from a content standpoint of what we've been working on in the last 4 years. I'm just going to kind of run through some of our highlights and then dive into the meat of our content today. So we have addressed group living to be more inclusive and less biased in our code. We've completed neighborhood plans that cover 19 neighborhoods, and by the end of this year, we will have there will be 30 neighborhoods included. We've acknowledged the historic implicit bias in our zoning code and how systemic racism has impacted our communities differently across our city. We've developed small area plans for major redevelopment opportunities such as Park Hill Golf Course, which was mentioned, and Loretta Heights campus. We've passed inclusionary housing throughout the city. We've added cultural significance to our historic preservation criteria and completed our first historic context study, which is called Nuestras Historias, which is on the Latino Chicano history of Denver. We've innovated our community engagement through the pandemic several times, and we've adopted aggressive electrification and green building code to enable Denver to meet its carbon emissions reduction goals. And many of my fellow colleagues across the United States are leading similar efforts. So I wanted to take this time to look at a slightly different track with you today, given the important work that you and your institutions do for our profession. I thought it'd be helpful to spend time reflecting on advice that I give to planning students finding their way toward their passion. Often they want to know what classes they should take or what planning direction is the best to go into. Should they go into public sector or private sector? And what I tell them as a baseline is two things. You need good critical thinking and good judgment in the basis of social science. But beyond that, the attributes I've listed here are really what I look for in staff at all levels, from entry level to my deputy directors. These values are less focused on the policy issues of today, but are about how we as planning professionals influence the realm of public policy and ultimately city building. So I'll start with talking about a clear urban design vision and then lead into the rest. So I'm not sure if you all saw this article that came that was in the New York Times recently, entitled "America the Bland." And it was a series of questions, a quiz, which I failed, by the way. And while we like to think, well, Denver likes to think of itself as having this distinctive attitude around new revitalized areas of town, it turns out we don't. And in fact, the only reason I got this, you probably can't see this very well, but the only reason I got this picture right, which is the only picture I got right, is because there's snow on the ground. And my other options were Nashville and Seattle. So I knew I was going to get that one right. But it turns out we're looking pretty bland across the United States. And we are, as we are increasingly aiming to build more densely and produce more housing with a focus on delivering housing supply, we're at risk for losing the unique charms of our cities that exist in the detail of well-designed buildings and streets. That is the essence of good urban design and placemaking. Design guidelines, or the lack thereof, are partially responsible for this homogenized architecture and place. When repeated, an entire neighborhood can feel like it has lost its authenticity. My experience has been that as a city, we have let policy drive our position as planners without working it in tandem with the physical implications as to the sense of ownership of place, the public streets, and our communities. So we announced Denver's first chief urban designer this past fall, Eugenia Di Girolamo. We did a lot of press around it. This is out of one of the newspapers here, Westward, where we, as part of this announcement, we also restructured our agency to allow her to move across both divisions of long-range planning as well as development services, which is the development review side of the house. She works directly with other agencies on street projects, bridge design, park design, and capital projects. So everything that we are building as a city, we should have an opinion. Our planning department should have an opinion about what it looks like. She's also charged with creating a public dialogue about urban design and building support to define who Denver is from a design perspective. So the first thing we need to do is to set our urban design attitude. I don't know if you have this conversation in your cities, but when you ask somebody what is distinctively Denver or distinctively Chicago, that's actually probably definable, right? But distinctively Denver, we're too young of a city, and we've done too much urban renewal to actually be able to answer that question. So we need to think about, as we define that attitude, we need to think about what is it that creates design excellence? How do we put the pedestrian first? How do we empower our city planners to positively influence design outcomes? And then defining what makes Denver unique, what retains our authenticity and the feeling of Denver, even as we grow. And that can happen in a couple different ways. I think one is in transformative projects or transformative moves, those big city moves. In the West, we tend to have larger parcels of industrial that is transforming now for redevelopment. And we, for example, we have River Mile, that's about 35 acres, Ball Arena, right next to downtown, 55 acres, Loretta Heights, 70 acres, Burnham Yard, 60 acres. And this project here, Cherry Creek Spear Boulevard, Each of these has an opportunity to be transformative about what our future looks like. For Spear, it's our chief urban designer who's leading the work with the Department of Transportation and Parks, and in full support. The three agencies have aggregated our budgets and jointly agreed that the vision starts with our urban design chief. And can you imagine this street, which was originally designed under City Beautiful, but not actually for people, if it was redesigned for people and to highlight the creek, which you can barely make out in the ditch in the middle. The second way that urban design is critical is in the detail. This is one of our highlights. Hopefully you've had a chance to walk over to Denver Union Station, but we have to ensure that we have ground floor retail space that keeps neighborhood corridors active and vibrant, that we ensure buildings face the street and have transparency, and we create more welcoming streets that encourage people to choose to walk or to use transit instead of drive. So certainly this is a masterclass in adaptive reuse with public plaza. These public plazas used to be parking lots. They are vibrant and well used. It represents the best of activation, investments in transit, and excellence in design. And it was developed through the perseverance of Dana Crawford, who locally and nationally is renowned for her commitment to historic preservation and revitalization of city cores. So that leadership that she has brought to our city brings me to my next point around strong leadership. Cities need leadership, and if you consider that any American city has a comprehensive plan developed by its planning department that has a broad breadth of topics ranging from healthy communities to economic development, that city planners are really poised for that leadership to drive the future of the city. To actualize the comprehensive plan, we need to bring our leadership as planners to the highest level of city government. That is my responsibility as executive director and deputy mayor, and is greatly supported by the incredibly bright staff to bring the best ideas and policy forward for discussion with the mayor and council. And I'm just going to share a couple examples of that leadership from my staff. This literally came from a groundswell of staff working on a neighborhood project where our city staff began developing a multi-agency approach to identify, fund, and implement anti-displacement strategies that accompany public investment, whether it's a street, a park, or economic development improvements. So staff build alliances with partner agencies to allow our department, planning, we're just the planners, but they're allowing our department to oversee the program and direct other departments to implement. We lobbied to create a special revenue fund and garnered support from the mayor's office, Department of Finance, and City Council. While individual city agencies share in the responsibility to implement the tool, it was our city planners who saw the need and led the work. The purpose of this analysis is really to identify those capital projects that are generally over $10 million, which often catalyze subsequently private investment, right, which starts the displacement, and then drive our programs, our public programs, towards those anti-displacement efforts. And secondarily, this second example is this is a project amongst a group of planning directors when the George Floyd murders came about, planning directors were meeting on a quarterly basis. This is the top 30 planning directors across the country were coming together during COVID to meet. And we just felt we needed to be able to make a statement about how we wanted to acknowledge the role that our profession has played in systemic racism and how we were going to show up differently. So it really draws across the entire United States, and it's really to commit to changing our practices, policies, and regulations, and actions to create inclusive and diverse neighborhoods and cities that equitably meet the needs of all residents, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Obviously, we don't do this alone, but it means that our work and engagement in communities is part of that rethinking. And then this is really about, within the planning world, in the public sector, and I would say also from the private sector, right? These are all the areas of influence that we engage in. And my point really here is that in order to stand and lead the future of our cities, we need our planning students to begin to recognize, to exercise influence in their everyday. What impact did they have in their community, with their friends and family, and in class? Obviously I didn't always start as an executive director, although my siblings might have thought that way about my attitude, but I just started as a planning, intern at some point. And I challenge all of my staff at whatever level they are at, how are you influencing those around you and the work that you're doing and the community that we are in? So my ask to you all is to do the same with the students that you have, is start asking them about what is their leadership path? How do they think about leadership? What is their role? Again, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be an executive director, but you gotta be able to show up. And I think you've got a great audience, because the majority of us go into this business because we care. So we want to be able to influence. So, simple things like know your audience when you walk into a room, be able to read the room. How are you going to negotiate, and how are you going to compromise? And how do you listen to others' perspective and then use their words to convince them to go your direction, right? And you never end up 100%, but that's how we influence. And if we can have more city planners influencing at the city building level, I think our cities will come out better. All right, so moving on to just kind of heading down my list of things for you, keeping on track. Just want to talk about how community engagement has changed literally in the last 3 years. But certainly over the last 20 years. When I began my career, if you had 20 to 30 people show up at a community meeting, you would just check the box and keep rolling. But it turns out those were probably 20 to 30 people who all pretty much had the same opinion, either good or bad, either with you or against you, but they all had the same opinion. So it wasn't about hearing all of the community, it was just hearing whoever had the time and the resources and knew the city planning system of knowing when to show up. Today our landscape is totally different. On major projects, we have hundreds of people showing up at meetings. On the East Area Plan, which covers 4 Denver neighborhoods, we had 500 people at one meeting. And I will say I was 6 weeks into my job, and it was a tough meeting. At Park Hill Golf Course, we had several meetings with 200 plus people attending. And when we do zoning code amendments, we have had, in a matter of days, we have reached over 1,000 people through a series of open houses. But obviously, as I mentioned, it's not just the numbers that count, it's whether or not you've had meaningful engagement. And just to describe a couple of the pictures, at the top is the working with the Denver Indian Center as we launched our historic context study on American Indian history in Denver. You can see the Jenga, which is using games for participation in citywide planning efforts. And then on the bottom, we were struggling with we were working in a neighborhood that had a high rentership, and renters typically don't participate in planning or city efforts. And so we got together with some food trucks and set up some tables with descriptions and tried to lure folks in as they were coming out to get to the food trucks, but also kind of intervening and asking questions and getting them engaged in their community. So Denver's participation and engagement has evolved. Back in the 70s, we established registered neighborhood organizations as an ordinance by law, and turns out it has almost not changed at all in the past 50 years. It inherently advantages those who know the system, who have the time and the resources to attend those meetings. while public processes have always been open to the public, it is not, it certainly changed with electronic communication, Zoom meetings, and really giving avenues to reach residents that would not typically show up to meetings, who could feed their family, have us on Zoom, and be able to still, type in the chat their opinion based on what they're hearing. Today, using also the equity lens about what does community engagement mean, that we are recognizing how certain communities have been disadvantaged and marginalized, and using things such as community navigators, language access, and accessibility to break down those barriers by intentionally focusing our resources on providing a path to participation to communities that otherwise would not be heard. So what makes it meaningful? We have used several different tools, and I think part of the answer is using all the tools all the time, and then seeing what works and what doesn't work, and then trying it again, right, for your second meeting and your third meeting, and always adapting. But just as a list of things that we use mailed surveys, intercept surveys, yard signs, neighborhood newspapers. We piggyback off of existing events like food drives or sports tournaments, festivals. We build partnerships with community organizers that share a similar mission and have more trust in the community. And an example of that, I'll talk about two examples, is our work with community navigators. This is, in part, what we kept hearing, and this was also during the pandemic, is that we are not trusted. We, government, are not trusted. And so teaming up with this gentleman is James Roy, and he runs the Denver Metro Community Impact. He subsequently hired a bunch of navigators to work in partnership that are coming from other local nonprofits. This is specific for the Park Hill Golf Course project. And they did a couple things. One, they focused specifically on underrepresented groups only. In this particular case, we focused on race and income. We paid them for their time. They committed to neutrality on controversial topics. Park Hill, in particular, this is a very controversial project. And they have established networks. They are typically from the community, so they are trusted. And we ask them to meet with targeted residents either on one-on-one basis or in focus groups of like 8 to 12. And then they gather that information and they reported it back and in a public report, right? And this, I can share this link out, but the community voice report is that. The second piece that we've been really successful with is youth outreach. And if I think I hadn't really thought about it this way, but we are talking to the community about the future of their neighborhood, and we are talking to everybody but the people who are going to be there in 20 years. Like, literally. The people who are showing up to the public meetings are 60, 80 years old, right? And they're driving the future of the community, and they certainly are part of the voice, but we really need to be talking to high school students and kids about what do they want to see, what are their aspirations and their needs today, and what they want for the future. So it also is tremendously fun, right? Because you just get honest opinions about what's great in their neighborhood and what's not working so well. So we get our planners into high schools to teach classes in social studies classes. We get students involved in the neighborhood plan. So when we pick a high school to go teach in, it's also in the same neighborhood that we're doing a neighborhood plan. And then we hire youth navigators in those high schools who, and give them some aids in going out and designing their own outreach for their peers. And we get two populations. We get other high school students, and then we start getting some of their parents in, right, or their guardians in, who start hearing about this and then getting engaged. We work with after-school programs, boys and girls clubs, engaged youth directly, and again, then we're starting to pull in their parents as they're coming to pick up. And it doesn't have to be specifically about a neighborhood plan, about my business. It has to be about meeting them where they're at. So if they're picking their kid up for basketball, it's an opportunity for me to give them a slice of pizza and talk about their neighborhood. And then we also try to be thoughtful about reaching out to schools and programs that tend to have a higher percentage of students of color. So the last two pieces here I want to talk about are data-driven and evidence-based decision-making, and both for our, as we work with communities, as we work with our elected officials, and then our internal operations, which is on the development review side. So I think everyone's familiar with these maps. This is Denver's map, and I don't know if I can orient. Here's downtown Denver. Here's all the rail that's now, we are somewhere in this area here that was all rail at one point. Curtis Park, Baker, North Denver, this edge of North Denver, and Barnum are all obviously communities of color. This will also just point out, if you all are familiar with Cherry Creek Shopping Mall, which is a high rent shopping mall, which now exists here, this neighborhood were all the maids and servants that served this neighborhood here. And it's described in the homeowners loan corporation. So you're familiar with this. So how do we take this and use it for data? So we mapped our areas of vulnerability over the areas that were redlined. So the hatch mark here are the areas from 1938 that were redlined. And you can see they are still redlined, right? These are the neighborhoods that have low land value, but high higher zoning increases, or ability to increase zoning or build more densely. And so the opportunity for displacement, or the vulnerability to displacement, is here, right? Like it is real. So this is one of the data points that we bring out as part of all of our neighborhood plans. This is a starting point for us to acknowledge using data of where we have come from and how we're trying to make those changes. So we translate that into our comprehensive plan, into our land use transportation plan. Blueprint Denver it just passed in 2019. We updated it. It's the first plan we have had in Denver that acknowledges and uses socioeconomic factors as we evaluate our city. And then we use this equity data from Blueprint to inform our neighborhood plans and making decisions about prioritizing communities that have the least access to opportunity, the greatest vulnerability to displacement, and minimal housing and job diversity. We keep folding that down like a waterfall. We take those three and we add those to as a starting point for our neighborhood plans, which are typically 4 or 5 neighborhoods grouped together to go through a neighborhood planning process. These maps have a basis, each have a basis of about 8 or 9 data points, and then into that we add an additional 15 data points to identify the next areas that we're going to choose, typically based on whether or not they've ever had a plan or had a plan in the last 20 years. Then we're always just updating our equity data and what that lens is, and so we've added that into that assessment. And so internally, how we use data, and hopefully this pops up pretty readily, yeah. These are our Power BI dashboards, and the work that we do on development review allows, we always are getting comments from developers about we're being slow, there's too many people or everybody's home working. And so we have a number of dashboards, and you can see this is based on site plan, log metrics, permits, and we can look at what the trend is, we can look at week by week, we can understand what's coming in, what's going out. At a more more detailed level, our supervisors can see how many people are, they can see who is, what their rate of review times are per day, per week, so that if we suddenly see a huge volume coming into the city, such as you can see, let me go back to here. When we had the inclusionary housing ordinance pass, we gave a window of time for developers to submit their plans without it being applied, without inclusionary housing. And this is that moment, right? So then, oh, it's not, I can see the whole thing. Do you know? I'm on a web link.
Okay. So maybe.
Sorry about that. We'll try this one more time, and then I have a backup. Nope. Okay, let's just go to the backup. Thank you for catching that.
Sure.
Sorry, somebody should have said something.
That's fine.
Okay, so this is what else. Does this look better? Yeah. So, sorry, I was running all over. So, sorry, I have it live on my computer. But this is the data that we use internally to measure how much, what the spigot, this volume of the spigot, how much is coming in, how our teams are performing. This is the moment I was just talking about, just before the deadline for inclusionary housing, right? We saw, typically we get 300 site development plans a month. We had 200 in 2 months, and that is that spike. We can look at what the valuation of projects that are coming in. So right now, as the market is starting to get a little cooler, we're seeing a smaller valuation of those big multifamily projects coming in. During the pandemic, everybody was remodeling their home, bathroom, and so you saw many more projects come in, but much smaller valuation. So tax revenue started dropping. It's just to say, like, let's use data. It's really helpful. So apologies for that one. So last point, I just want to talk about, and I think Rolf and I were talking about this, but certainly not least important. And if anything, one of the most important points is, as a profession, and certainly in Denver, we are desperate to diversify. And I mean that for engineers, architects, and planners, who are all in my department. So we have done a couple things to try to change that. One, for the first time ever, we have a consistent line item in our budget every year for internships. And those internships are specifically geared towards students of color. And we also recognize that we have got to, we love CU Denver and we work with you guys like all the time, but we have got to hit those kids when they're in high school and undergraduate. So we are looking at geography programs at Metro State. We're looking at engineering programs. I mean, I'm an anthropology major, so like let's go there, right? They're still thinking about humans and how humans get together and settle. And so we've really got to show up differently. And in addition to reaching out to our graduate programs, we're trying to think about how to show up differently. I mentioned the high school community navigators that we employ and that we invite to come in and have lunch with senior leadership, try to give them some exposure to our program. And ultimately, we are doing this not because, I mean, it is the right thing to do, but we need our city government and our planning department who engages with the community to be reflective of the community we're engaging with, and we don't have that yet. So, with all that said, whatever tough challenges are ahead of us, safety, traffic, affordability, they're going to demand thoughtful urban design solutions, strong leadership from planners, quality community engagement, data-backed decisions, and planners that reflect the communities that we live in. And I'm confident we will meet that challenge, and I'm grateful that you all have the future of our cities in your hands and are shaping those students now. So thank you very much for the time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Who'd like to ask the first question? And if you could introduce yourself and tell Laura where you're coming from, that'd be great.
Min Zhang from Austin, Texas, University of Texas at Austin. High quality design needs lots of money to implement. So how did you come up with this high quality design implemented? And Austin had a sad story of this code rewriting and then failed after 10 years court battle. So the Denver successor could be a great role model for Austin to follow, though.
Well, so I think you're talking about form-based code. So I think we have, that's a little bit of our challenge on urban design, is that we built a form-based code, passed in 2010, and then we just said, if you meet the minimum standards, we don't have to think about design. And it turns out you still have to think about design. And so we cannot rest our laurels, our urban design chops, on code. Code is really policy, I think. And there is always going to be some subjective component to design. And that's just a comment. One, I'll challenge you on the point that all good design takes money. I think there is some great innovative work that is happening with architecture and urban design firms that are small and hungry and are thinking differently about this planet and how they can reuse materials. And yeah, is there great urban design that's happening for luxury condos? 100%. Does it always have to be that way? No. So I think we have to challenge ourselves of how are we doing good design. And when I talk about design, I think about the spaces in between the buildings, right? As a planner and a city builder. And so I care about the facades and the awnings and the transparency, and all those materials matter. But the city, like, how is my Department of Transportation how am I as a planner making sure the Department of Transportation is delivering on good streetscape? And that's just, I mean, you can do a lot of things, just do it differently, same cost.
Thank you. This is Jiayun Yu from University of Central Florida, located in Orlando. So I'm just a visitor for these 2 days, and I love to walk around the downtown area. I realize you have a lot of plans like the 16th Street Mall. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And I also crossing the bridge to the park. There's a great dog park over there. So I see a lot of young professionals. I think yesterday afternoon they go there, and I just curious about around like after like 6:30 p.m. the 16th Street Mall and also the downtown area on that side. I did not see a lot of people on the street, except yesterday there's a Denver Nuggets game, so a lot of people walking to the Ball Arena, mm-hmm. right? So I'm just curious, do you guys, because you show a lot of maps, show a lot of plans, so how is connect to the user experience? Because I did not see a lot of activity over there, it's just right after 6:30.
Yeah, this is why I don't sleep at night, right? Because we committed our downtown in the 60s and 70s to urban renewal. And if you saw the before and after pictures of our downtown and the number of parking lots, after we raised, beautifully designed, human-scaled buildings and instead put in single-use buildings for office workers, and with all the right avenues, widening all the right avenues so that you could drive directly into the basement parking structure, go up in the elevator, work all day, come back down, and then go to your suburban bedroom community. It is why we have the problem we have today. And everyone's blaming it on COVID, which is a huge contributor. And we're one of the few companies downtown or businesses downtown that is requiring our staff to show up 3 days a week. Private sector is much softer with their employees. So that's part of the problem. But I would say we started seeing this before the pandemic. And the tipping point for me was British Petroleum, right? We're part of the oil and gas dynasty, right, of the West. And British Petroleum came in at the regional headquarters. And they didn't choose 17th Avenue, where every law firm, oil and gas company, consulting firm is. They chose Platt Street, which has great retail, old buildings, right next to the river, the South Platte, and the trail. And they built a 5-story, human-scaled office building. And that was in 2015. So this is a long time coming, and we have kicked off an office conversion program, which is the place to start, right, for our upper downtown, which has the highest number of urban renewal buildings from the 60s and 70s and 80s, to convert from office to residential. I would say, as a planner, and the planning director of this city, my goal is to make the central business district a central neighborhood district. That is what's going to actually bring back office. Because when you have a great place to be with vibrant ground floor retail, you're going to have you're going to have workers who want to be in that environment and live in that environment, right? If you look at Latin America, I tend to go to Latin America a lot. Those cities with those city centers that predate urban renewal, they are alive and thriving, right? Mexico City, I was in Querétaro last year in Mexico. Buenos Aires, those city centers are thriving. We have a land use issue that's going to take us a few years to fix. But awake every night over that, 100%.
Great, thank you. Jim Spencer, Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School at Louisiana State University. So first off, shout out to UCLA. There's a lot of friendly faces in here. You should organize an alumni reunion. You will have great participation here in Denver.
All right, I didn't know. I just thought I was here alone.
That's right. But more on topic. In the research world, we hear a lot about institutional investors in single-family rental property homes, and then of course there's the displacement issue that comes along with that. So from your standpoint, are you seeing this? Like, what does it look like from your standpoint?
You're talking about short-term rental?
It could be short-term rental or sort of like corporate investment in buying up single-family homes for any kind of rental.
So, the good and the bad of being in the middle of the country is that you sometimes get forgotten. So where you're probably seeing those are on the coast, maybe. I would not say that I've seen that or heard about that in Denver for just for corporate investment. We are thoughtful, or we try to be thoughtful about short-term rental and making sure that our homeowners are in the primary, live full-time in the primary use. And then the second unit is up for Airbnb or I guess not VBRO, but short-term rental. So we're not seeing it. I would say it's not been on the radar, and I haven't had a lobbyist come see me, so.
Hi, Jeff Doshna at Temple University in Philadelphia. So putting Eleanor Sharp's quote up there made me happy.
Oh, yeah. She's the best.
We love Eleanor. She teaches for us, too. Following up a little bit on this, but I wanted to ask, because the inclusionary requirement is relatively recent, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're starting to, because those projects obviously take a little bit of time to get up and because of funding and all the rest of it. Maybe you can talk about how successful it's been so far, what's in the pipeline, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so I'd say, so those are any development, any projects that have come in after the July 1 deadline. There's probably a couple hundred. They're still in our process, and in part, because there was such a huge influx just before it went into implementation or became law, that we're still working that elephant through. So it's hard to say, and I guess I'm confident in it in that we had a lot of lessons learned of watching and talking to other cities about what's the breaking point. And we also acknowledge that we're not trying to fix all affordable housing with this, that this is really a partnership with the private sector to deliver on affordable housing, deed-restricted affordable housing, as a part of the solution. So we have more federal funding, and we have a special revenue fund that we tax ourselves for affordable housing that we really drive towards the lowest and the lowest affordability, highest need. And then this is, we kind of parted those waters and said, this is a different, we're targeting something different. So we think we'll be successful. And we ultimately had, a fair number of developers supporting us at council that evening.
I actually have a question of my own. No one can ignore the fact that Denver has a large population of unhoused people. And the way that you see an area like the 16th Street Mall, and so on, must have something to do with that. So as the director of the executive director of CPD, how do you work together with your partners in homeless services, in police, and other? So, like, what's the level of engagement across agencies and bureaus to really try to get a handle on making sure that people are safely housed and comfortable and have access to what they need?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure if you can stick around tonight, there's going to be a mayoral debate on it later tonight for the 16 candidates. So we have a department called Housing Stability, and they receive that special revenue fund and have a strategic plan about how to spend those dollars, how to work with our partners. They also, so the planning department's role in this is easing zoning code and giving it the greatest amount of flexibility for tent encampments, for converting motels into type 4 residential use for those experiencing homelessness. And so from the standpoint of how are we working with the homeless populations, it's a team effort, obviously, between our different safety departments and HOST, the Housing Stability Department, to try to, again, to your point about wraparound services, offering alternatives if they so choose. Every staff member in the city goes through sensitivity training around working with homeless, or as you're on your way to work and you might engage, someone might engage with you, and how do you think about what their perspective is, and most likely trauma informed. And so we try to show up no matter where we are in the city as city employees, understanding that their position. So we have a number of different programs that are always tied together. It's somebody who has expertise in coordinating and working with the homeless, as well as safety. There's usually a lead, right? You want the coordinator to be out in front, and then if there's a need for safety backup, that's there as well.
Questions here?
Hello, I'm Laura Solitaire. I'm with Texas Southern University, which is right in Houston, Texas. Yesterday, we had the privilege of hearing from a colleague of yours in the city about, I forget her full title, but the city's storytelling director.
Rowena.
Rowena, could you talk to us a little bit about how those stories are then connected to what you do in planning? How are you guys using those stories?
Yeah, so specifically, I mean, we team very closely with Row on our historic context studies. So the first thing we did around that is we changed the criteria in landmark preservation that the Landmark Preservation Commission uses to determine whether something is historic or not, to include cultural significance. That's the first biggest piece, right? And then we began acknowledging that there is a multitude of histories here, and we need to record all of the histories. And so we teamed with Rowena, and I think I showed a picture earlier of the kickoff event at the American Indian Center, and Row is a part of that, right? So she comes with us and begins collecting names and listening. Then that becomes part of a document, the historic context study of what those stories are. And in the case with the first historic context, Nuestras Historias, that was Row creating a documentary of people's stories in Denver, of the Latino Chicano story that we have to tell here. Which is as I'm sure you heard from her yesterday, like the beautiful part is someone's not trying to dictate what the story is. She steps back and just has someone tell their story, and it is so powerful and much more engaging than a planning report, let's say. So that's how we have engaged with her from the historic context side.
Still have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, Jordan Yin from Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama. So planning directors, this is a room full of educators. I don't think we do a lot to train planning directors. Did you ever hear anything about being a planning director in your master's program? And the question is, should we be introducing this a little earlier? Should we be supporting people early on? Or do we just sort of expect planning directors to wing it and be really good at their jobs later on?
That's what I'm advocating. Really, it's around leadership, right? The more I sit in this seat, the more I want to influence the mayor. The more I want to make sure the chief of staff understands the land use issues that our city has. And when you're just seeing homelessness, affordability, transportation as the issues, and you don't have a planning basis to understand how those things come together, right? Like, why do we have a large homelessness population downtown? Because it's a single-use district. It is not a community. So when you don't have anybody there, you don't have eyes on the street, and so you can introduce people who are not welcomed anywhere else or who want to do nefarious activity, right? So, right? And whether they go on to be a planning director or something else, like, how do we become more influential? And I think that is through leadership. And again, it can happen at a community organizer level. It can happen at a city government level. And I will say the reason I started thinking about being a planning director is because I was a special project manager to the Stapleton International Redevelopment, and I had bi-weekly one-on-ones with the planning director, and she was fantastic, Jennifer Moulton, and she was my mentor, and she took the time and helped guide me, and that's what really inspired me. And but no offense to UCLA, I got out of UCLA, I didn't know that was a thing. So, we have a moment, right? We are poised to put our people in places of power and influence in our cities. So go do it. Let me help. And how can we help, right? And how can we help you? What internships do we need to have, and how do we need to make sure that the grad students are having lunch with me and senior leadership, right? So anyways, that's my pitch.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great to have you here, Laura, and
Thank you.
And good luck with your work here in the future and in the rest of the region too.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.